just how much the Fed, how much store it puts on that at this point in the cycle of all things. And to do that, Damien Williamson from Bell Potter, live from our Melbourne studio. Well, welcome to you. I mean, again, it all comes down to the market is on sort of a launch phase for more rate hikes out of the world's largest economy. With it, you've seen those volatility gauges effectively stalling because we've become so inured, I guess, to a lower for longer. But the sort of hybrid market option, what is going on there at a time like this? How would you characterise it?
Yeah, well, the hybrid market's had a very strong past 2 years. Effectively, if you go back February 2016, Commonwealth Bank issued their Pearls 8 security at a margin of 5.2% over bank bill when the hybrid market was down and out. And since that time, investors who participated in new issues have done really, really well. And also over that time, the market has also reflected all the bank capital raisings in 2015, where the 4 major banks raised $17.3 billion of new equity. So effectively, what you're saying is that spreads have come in significantly on the bank hybrids, where 2 years ago, CBA issued at a margin of 5.2 over bank bill. If they went to market today, they'd probably be issuing a margin of 3.3 to 3.5% over 90-day bank bill. So you can see that there has been a significant recovery in the market. And part of that is investor sentiment that they say this market's doing really well. All the new issues, you've had 14 past new issues have all listed at a premium. And I think right at the moment, people are just trying to get onto the next new issue.
This, you observe as well, this has now the prospect of being a second straight year of net redemptions. So just explain the thinking process at that point that crystallises.
Yes, so effectively, in 2018, there was $7 billion of securities up for redemption, provided issuers redeem their securities at the call date. So we expect around $3 billion of debt securities to be redeemed and $4 billion of bank preference shares to be redeemed. So what happens there is that money flows back into investors' hands. They've got to find a place to reinvest that money. And what you increasingly find is when you've got a year of net redemption, there's a scramble for investors to participate in the new securities. Issuers aren't issuing as much anymore, and that's been pushing prices up, and effectively the funding costs for the banks through issuing preference shares are lower. And that's really reflected in the CBA's margin 2 years ago being 5.2. That's if they did an issue now, that'd be 3.3 to 3.5 in my estimation.
If you move, though, away from what is, after all, this security blanket that surrounds the sector, the too big to fail, the notions of that, and therefore the investor prepared to go one step away from where they would conventionally accept a level of risk. What of other industries? What of other sectors? How are you observing those levels? I mean, the 3.3 and 3.9, for instance, on the hybrid.
Yep.
How is that playing out for, say, a REIT that might have been off to the US? And in the last 12 months, have we seen views change either of the nature of retail, on the viability of the model, of the willingness to still fund it, and within a certain band? How's that changing?
Well, debt spreads have been coming in across the board, whether you're a retailer, property trust, bank, financial issuer. There's been massive demand in the wholesale market. In terms of corporate issuance last year, there was over $100 billion done, which was a record in 2017. And spreads have been falling lower.
Even though that was a sector in the US that was the most shorted in reporting season. So we didn't see any spread leakage across in hybrid land.
No.
No. Well, and what do you put that down to?
Well, there's just a scramble for securities at the moment. That last year, in terms of issuance, we had about 5.3 billion of issuance, and there was about 9.3 billion of redemption. So there was $4 billion trying to find a home, plus investors are feeling really good about the market because securities that they bought in 2016 were trading, a number of those securities now are trading over $108. So they've had a really good experience. They're getting the income along the way, and the sentiment of the sector is really good. And plus, you look at the banks, it's virtually at the moment all planets align. You look at the banks, their common equity tier 1 ratios are over 10%. You go back 2007, CBA's common equity tier 1 is only 4.5%, and they're issuing a preference share at 1.05 over bank bill. So you look at that, very strong capital levels. impairment charges are at cycle lows. 3 of the 4 major banks have got impairment charges at 15 basis points or lower. And all the banks' profits went up last year, and even with the Royal Commission pending on the banks, I don't see that as a major negative for the sector. The point I'd say about the Royal Commission is APRA's done a significant amount of work strengthening bank capital levels. The next area that APRA needs to work on is improving bank corporate governance.
Well, yes, I mean, that's not going to happen necessarily in 5 minutes, and can APRA even lay claim to being the arbiter of that ultimately, a wholesale arbiter of that?
Well, it's a whole regulatory scheme, but
yeah. I
think it's fair to say that the banks aren't top quartile globally in corporate governance at the moment, and this is what the banks really need to. This is the next area of focus for the regulators.
Is there a mismatch, therefore, between qualifying for too big to fail now, but not being in the top quartile of corporate governance? That's almost that's paradoxical in the extreme, is it not? It basically acknowledges that you can do what you like within what's deemed acceptable, but you've just said that doesn't stack up internationally as being in the top quartile. So why should they get the guarantee from taxpayers?
Well, if you look at what the banks have had to do over the past few years, they've raised their capital levels a significant amount. The CBA in June 2007 had 4.5% common equity tier 1 capital. The 4 major banks today have all got common equity tier 1 capitals over 10%. If their common equity tier 1 capital falls below 8%, then they've got to cut dividends and can't pay bonuses. So you look at there's steps in place to prevent another. The banks have all been strengthened, but there has been.
How many more assets have they got to sell? That's the problem, isn't it? They've got to start selling the very assets that they lent on because they've sold all their other businesses to get to those levels, as you well know.
Well, they have sold assets, but the thing to reflect is that the banks are still paying out, say, around 75% of profits. So they're retaining 25% of their profits every year, which is increasing their capital levels.
What are the amber lights flashing for you that will tell you there could be a problem? And if we even park banks off to one side for a moment, just in terms of hybrids per se, what are the signposts that you most acutely observe?
Well, first of all, investing in any listed debt or hybrid security or preference share, we look at issuer strength. We want to know the issuer is going to pay income and the issuer will give you $100 back at a set date in the future. So we look at issuer strength. So all the work that APRA's done in strengthening Australian banks, that's a big tick for us when our clients put money into a Commonwealth Bank or a preference share. The warning lights, what's caused the market weakened between August 2014 and February 2016. Between that period, the new issue margin for a CBA preference share went up from 2.8% over bank bill to 5.2%. We put down the week, and during that period, 8 new issues in a row did not list above face value. We put down that weakness to basically an oversupply of new issuance, and also that the banks raised a lot of capital, which sucked a lot of money out of the sector. And also investor sentiment weakened because people looking at the securities trading below $100 thinking there was something wrong with the sector.
Yeah, a glut doesn't tend to impress, right? In any capacity. Damien, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Carson.
Enjoy the Australian Open from your vantage point, no doubt.